that. I wanted to use this session to talk about Norman Fisher's book, Training in Compassion. Norman Fisher. Stacen was talking about this book when she gave the communications workshop. It was like the first of our series of Sangha Sutra workshops. And with a lot of resistance, I decided to pick it up. And I actually bought the audiobook, and the audiobook was about 6.5 hours, start to finish. And on my flight back from Japan, when I was there recently with Shoyu and Kyoshin, I just listened to the whole thing straight through. Did not leave my seat, just had my shitty little airplane headphones, listening to Norman Fisher, who read his own audiobook. And it was so good. It was so good. It really, really grabbed me. And, I had heard of it as like a series of exercises trying to like cultivate compassion or something like that. And so that wasn't really grabbing me, that idea. But once I got into it, I realized it's about the entirety of the universe. It really does touch everything. So after my airplane stupor listening to it for 6.5 hours, I was like, I want to talk about this book so bad with my people at Sweetwater. So I hope it helps us come together in our practice. It's called Training in Compassion, and it's basically a commentary on an old Tibetan work called The Root Text of the 7 Points of Training the Mind, or for short in Tibetan it's called Lojong. Lojong, Lojong, Lojong. So this is a book of commentary by a Zen teacher on an old Tibetan Buddhist text. And it's actually probably the worst thing to read or talk about during session. Not the best choice, traditionally, because in session, we're making this commitment to really being here, really dropping off body and mind. Dogen, our major guide, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Right? So it's all about dropping away, really coming face to face with emptiness. Huge, vast, universal emptiness. And this practice, this Lojong practice, training in compassion, in a way is kind of a practice in the opposite. It's not about dropping away, it's about fixing and moving and methods and trying to like do something, right? Sesshin is kind of our safe container to do nothing and to experience the great nothingness. But this Lojong practice is very much saying we're going to do something. We're going to transform things. So, and we'll get to some of, he talks about this, he acknowledges this in the book, and we'll get to it. But it's just to say that like after, because I've been reading it again to try to prepare for these talks, and man, it is just confusing me so much. And introducing a Tibetan practice in the middle of our very Zen tradition of sesshin can be a really big wrench in the cogs. But as we know, that can be the most powerful place. So I hope this does serve as a wrench for your cogs. I hope every Dharma talk does. And shit, I hope every Zazen period does. Right? I know it feels really good when the cogs are spinning so smoothly. This talk aligns exactly with what I was thinking. That feels really good. The teacher just said something that I found myself on the cushion. It's all coming together. And that's nice. But I think the real magic lies in our resistance when the wrench makes the cogs squeal and churn, and we say, what is that? So I hope this does that for you. So as I've just been reading through, I've been kind of underlining things that pop out. I don't know if it will result in a coherent, cohesive talk, but as we know, just let the words enter your ear holes and absorb and drop away. He says, okay, so this Lojong practice that he's commenting on is about, like the book says, training in compassion, right? It's teachings and exercises, or what he calls slogans, that help us cultivate compassion. Compassion, feeling with ourselves and others. So he says, compassion and resilience are not rarefied human qualities available only to the saintly. These essential and universally prized qualities can be cultivated by anyone willing to take the time to do it. Yeah, so that not only is like empowering for me, but it also, I have this feeling of like, it doesn't let me off the hook. Like, oh, well, I'm not Mother Teresa, and I'm not the woman who opened the food bank down the thing. So, I guess, that's just not who I am. So, no, like all of us have to rise to the occasion to invite and cultivate compassion. Compassion can become the way we are and live on a daily basis. We can train our minds. We are not stuck with our fearful, habitual, self-centered ways of seeing and feeling. So that might seem like obvious. And again, whenever we're reading anything or studying anything, if you ever have the thought of like, oh, I know that, or like, oh yeah, that feels familiar, really take a look at that. Whenever I catch myself saying, oh yeah, I know that, or I've heard that before, really look at how much is that an excuse to not go deeper, to not see how, in fact, I may not know it as well as I think I do. So yeah, this concept of we're not stuck. Inherently, we are not stuck with anything. Even really, really deep-seated patterns and habits and conditions and even traumas, they're real and they are deep, but we're not stuck. That's basically the third noble truth that Norman is talking about here. There is a way out of the chains of conditioning and attachment, concepts and ideas, the incarceration of the self. We don't have to be stuck in them. we can work on it. We can open up. We can metabolize. And one thing that this book is really helping me to see is that for a lot of those things, just sitting may not do the trick. It's hard for me to say that because I want to believe that it can. But, well, we'll go more into that later. But that's the bottom line, is we're not stuck with who we are. He goes on to say, our brains are renewed through activity and reflection. They are, as scientists say, plastic. So our minds are trainable. Our basic patterns of thought and feeling can be different. And yeah, again, that includes everything. Well, a lot of things. I can't not be 5'11". I don't think I can change that. But it always makes me think of this practice that I've kind of cultivated, which is where I really take note whenever I start a sentence with, I'm the kind of person who, just notice every time you say that. And then ask, is that really true? And I hear it all the time. It's a very common phrase. Well, I'm the kind of person who has to sleep in on the weekends, so I can't make it to your 8 o'clock class. Or I'm the kind of person who needs to be alone at least half of the time. So, or I'm the kind of person who, can't watch a movie with people. It comes up in so many nuanced ways. And just notice, how necessary is that? And over time too, yeah, maybe right now because of a major trauma, I'm the kind of person who can't be locked in a small room. That might be very true. That might be very unhealthy and very triggering. But then notice when I start clinging to that, when I stop believing that I can actually shift that, thinking that the rule of impermanence just doesn't apply to me. I'm just this way, and so it has to be that way. And maybe it does. I'm just saying to notice every time I deny myself the ability to shift and to open up. And I think you might see over time that in fact, we can shift a whole lot. I mean, who among us can look back at our 15 years younger self and say that they would have expected everything that I am today? Definitely not me. My 15 years ago self would be very surprised at a lot of the stuff that I'm like today. So yeah, open to shifting. And that's part of this sessing practice too, this intensive letting go, dropping away, just being with this moment is a real opportunity to loosen up, to soften, to shift, to let go of things that we think we are. I haven't found many other practices that do that quite as strongly as sessing. So yeah, we're plastic, we can change. So then he goes on talking, this is all the introduction of the book. Hopefully we can get through the intro here, maybe not. If we want to develop stamina and strength in the body, we have to work at it repeatedly over time. It won't do to simply decide we're going to go weight train, read a book about it, and intend to do it. We actually have to go to the gym and do the reps. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because we're all here right now doing the reps. But I just thought that was kind of notable, um, particularly because, I mean, you guys are here on Sundays. How many people, it's amazing, like during Zazen, we have maybe like 7 or 8 people here. And as soon as the talk starts, we're up at 25. We all want to just receive the teaching, receive these words, receive the concepts, take what feels good, hear some kind of like really sweet phrase and be like, oh, I'm going to hold on to that phrase and that made me feel so good. But like, this is the reps, y'all. This is the reps. I love comparing Zen practice, spiritual practice to weight training, going to the gym. There's a lot of parallels. Because, yeah, like he says, you can't just read about weight training. You got to go do the reps. And you can't just go to the gym for a year every day, get really big, and say, yes, I did it. I am now strong. Because in just a few months, you'll be back to being scrawny like me. It's a lifestyle. It is a life practice. Both the gym and our spiritual practice. It's constant. And we hit plateaus. And we start doubting. And maybe we even get injured and have to take a break. But then we get back to it. Constantly. Constant life practice. I guess a little context, just kind of fun, that the original text that he's commenting on, this Lojong text, was written in the 12th century, which he points out was more or less the same time as Aquinas, Maimonides, and Dogen. So it's kind of fun. 12th century, 13th century, a lot of stuff, a lot of spiritual uh, iconic stuff was happening all around the world. And it was written by Geshe Chowa Yeshi Dorje, Tibetan monk, I guess. More context there. So he starts to get into why, as a Zen teacher, because Norman Fisher is originally a Zen teacher in the Suzuki Roshi lineage, I believe. Why is he writing this book on a Tibetan text? That really seems, in a lot of ways, kind of counter to the Zen way, right? I mean, I hope this is confusing you as much as it's confusing me, because my whole training has really been around, this concept of shikantaza, just sitting, this very experiential non-meditation, right? We say shikantaza is, the ultimate kind of meditation, and what it is non-meditation. As soon as there's even the slightest whiff of a method or a practice or anything, you've already lost it. You're already lost in the weeds of concepts and ideas. So that's what I'm used to, this holding up, this exalting of like non-meditation, completely just thusness. And I think we all know how difficult that can be. And so here's this guy in that Soto lineage who's very familiar with Dogen, who decides to write a book about like the most methodological practice you could possibly have. There's 59 different slogans, and they're not even koans where you just kind of like allow them. They're like actual like exercises and training your mind, and I have a lot of resistance to that. Training the mind. That sounds like a cult. That sounds like some new agey, you know, follow this exercise and you'll become this kind of person. I don't, Dogen is so clear. Study the self to forget the self. Don't do this particular exercise so that you can change yourself to be different. That sounds totally not Zen. So what's he doing? Why are we even talking about this? Um, he says, one main reason I am writing this commentary has to do with what I consider a serious weakness in Zen, which is its deficiency in explicit teachings on compassion. And he's not wrong. There is not much Zen literature. There are not many koans. There are not many books from Zen teachers that really make an active effort to cultivate compassion. And I could give a whole 2 hour long talk on why that would be, and maybe we'll get more into it tomorrow. But I guess the main thing to get across today, and look, I'm sorry, like I know this is probably very confusing. I'm so confused myself. So I hope that this kind of brings us together in a kind of mutual, what is this? What's going on here? He says, Zen assumes rather than encourages compassion and has very little to say about it. It assumes compassion. Just like when the Buddha had his awakening, he touched the earth and he says, wonder of wonders, all beings are naturally, intrinsically, those are my words, are the wisdom and compassion of the Tathagata. Compassion is what I am. It's not a skill to be cultivated. It's not a talent. It's not a tool to gain. It's simply what we are. And when I can reveal through Zazen the absolute oneness with everything, then compassion doesn't have to be cultivated. It just naturally arises because it's just what I am. The non-compassion, the jealousy, the separation, the competition, the hatred, that we add as we live our lives, as we work out our karma. But beneath it all is oneness. And any of us who have tasted that total oneness, even for an instant, knows that compassion is the only thing to do. You don't even have to choose it. You don't even have to work on it. You don't even have to effort to be compassionate, which is like that koan where the monk asks the teacher, why does Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, why do they have so many arms and eyes? Why are we helping all the time? Why is everything we do compassionate? How do I do that? What does that mean? That every hand I reach out, every one that I see, I approach with compassion. What could that mean? How do I do that? Why is that? And the teacher doesn't say, well, because if you follow these 59 steps and you take a lot of time and you cultivate compassion in this way and you think about it that way, then you... No, he simply says, it's like reaching for your pillow in the middle of the night. Totally unconscious. You don't even have to think about it or work on it. You're just half asleep. You don't think about grabbing your pillow. You're half asleep. You just do it. It's natural. And so that's kind of the stance that Zen takes on compassion. Study yourself. Forget that self. Drop off all of your ideas and concepts of separation, and then compassion will simply be what your life becomes. Don't even worry about it. Just sit and be with this, and you'll see how compassionate you already are. So that resonates with me. That's kind of been how my spiritual path has always been. But then Norman Fisher's like, okay, that's cool, but like also we can work on it. And then he talks about the importance of interfaith and interreligious sharing, and how important that is. And that's why he really wanted to like dive into this Tibetan teaching. And a lot of Zen teachers I know, once they get transmission, they start studying other things. I heard a talk the other day by this guy, Ben Connolly. He's been a Zen teacher for a number of years, and now he's really into like yoga chara. Norman Fisher is really into Lojong. A good friend of mine is studying Vipassana practices now. So that's really beautiful and, hard and kind of a luxury of the 21st century that we can have access to all these different things. So, yeah, in summary, this is great and it's bad and it's great and it's bad and it helps and it'll hurt you and it'll help you and it'll hurt you. So, good luck with all of that. So, yeah, I hope to keep talking about this and dive into what this really is to train compassion alongside this very intensive practice of sesshin, um, of seeing this vastness where compassion is not even possible.